My friend Bill, I would stand, but got this pain I've been in lately, so this will have to do right here. But yeah, so we just kind of met on Church Street. Just these random girls that walked up to this guy with a Israeli flag and kind of turned into this like impromptu group conversation or whatever. But then I found out sometime around that time that you were a big history enthusiast.
Absolutely. Loved history all my days, particularly the military history. But yes, been reading it for, in excess of 50 years, studying it.
Wow. That's awesome. And what, can you remember like kind of at what point that you realized that you had such a love for history, or like what sent you down that path?
I think what was beginning to happen is my folks were older people, and my father was an overage soldier in World War II, drafted at 35, which is an ancient man to be in the military, but he was fit. He went, and because he talked about it, and relatives, 4 or 5 of my uncles were in, their friends, I think this started me on the path. I started even before I could read. I remember this feelings looking at books with pictures, and it just burgeoned into this immense study.
Yeah.
It's never bored me. I love it still.
Because you said it was from having family that was in the military?
Multiple, like four or five uncles that were in the Second World War, my father,
Wow.
and a couple more uncles that Korean War.
Wow.
And they did discuss, and their friends, give me like pieces and in my father's case, a sanitized version of what he endured in Europe. Not some of the details.
And what was that? Do you have any of that story?
Well, when he got drafted, he attempted to volunteer because he was afraid that they were going to take his brother, who was turning 21 years old in 1944, and he thought if he volunteered, my Uncle Charlie wouldn't have to go. Well, it turned out they took them both, but the recruiter said, you've been drafted, you just go home and you'll hear and then you'll report. And so his basic training was Fort Sam Houston, which is San Antonio, Texas. Summer of 1943, which is pretty brutal. I mean, for a Yankee in the heat, sometimes you're having to hike 25 to 35 miles all night, but he could do it. Semi-professional basketball player after high school, he still was fit. And at that time, they were forming the 503rd Military Police Battalion. That's just what the table of operations called for. And half the guys were from Hamtramck, Michigan, which was Polish. And after the war, of course, the auto industry would be big there. It was encompassed by Detroit. And they went, most of the battalion went to England late 1943 into 1944 to be part of the Third Army, which a general that everybody's going to know this name would quickly take command of, George S. Patton. So they made the landing in Normandy, and they were with Patton's Third Army till the war ended, and after. It took time to get shipping back. You had to wait to come back as men replaced you.
So you said that he was he got like enlisted, basically drafted, your dad.
Yes.
In 1943.
Yes.
His camp was in boot camp or whatever. Special training was in Texas.
Fort Sam Houston is still in
Sam
use.
Houston, yeah.
And it's at San Antonio.
Houston is named after Sam Houston. Was
Yes.
he the governor?
Governor and early hero, and the commander.
He was around during the Civil War, wasn't he?
It's earlier. It's the birth of Texas ultimately as a state, but commander at the Battle of San Jacinto and the defeat of Santa Anna and the Mexican forces. And yeah, I believe he was the first governor.
And if I remember correctly, Sam Houston was actually anti-secession.
He knew that it was a mistake for Texas.
Texas did secede, but
yes.
He did not support it, as I recall.
Anybody that was thinking about past patriotism and past emotion would have realized, particularly if you had a real stake in, like economics and all that sort of stuff, Don't go to war with the United States government because you're going to lose.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to lose. It's an unwinnable fight.
Yeah.
He was against it, like you said. Yeah.
He was hoping he could save a lot of people's lives there, but to no avail. The secession trend had swept the South.
Yeah, that battle's around, I want to say 1837, maybe a little after. But
So, all right, so he was at Fort Sam Houston, and you said he was at D-Day? Well, he listed late, like 1943, but D-Day was what, 1944 or 5?
So yeah, he got drafted like March of 19...
I had a family member who was at D-Day too.
Yeah.
I don't know who.
He got drafted March of 1943, so his basic training was like spring, summer of 1943. And they didn't know what to do with them for a while, the Army, so they made him repeat basic training. And he got sick like the second time, pneumonia, and he was in Brooke General Hospital there, and they were ready to ship out. It was late that year, like getting into November. The first sergeant came in and he talked to him, and he said, we're shipping out for Europe, and are you with us? Because if you aren't with us, you're going to go to a Repel Depot, which is what the troops called a replacement depot, and it'll be people you don't know. You'll probably go to a combat unit, and they're not going to care about you. And he says, are you with us? And he says, I'm with you. But he says, I wasn't fully recovered. So they left like tail end of November of 1943 for Scotland, and they got there like January of 1944, and they guarded, his particular company guarded Patton's headquarters that were just east of the Welsh border in Cheshire, at a place called Pever Hall. And but it was Courtney Hodges was the commander of that army briefly, and then Patton would take over. They didn't know who Patton was when he came. He wasn't known yet, not by the rank and file. And so in June, they landed at Utah Beach, which is, if anybody knows, that's not like the horrible thing that was Omaha, which was the really awful beach with the cliffs, and it was a meat grinder. It was a bloodbath. Utah was a much easier trip, and they didn't land till D+5, which means 5 days after the invasion, because MPs are not, you need them for other duties. They're combat MPs, and they might be in combat, but that's not their primary duty. And they didn't have anything to do for 2 weeks. After a while, they were going to bring in Patton, because Patton was top heavy in armor, because that's his forte, mechanized warfare. He's the American expert on mechanized warfare. So for a couple of weeks, they're just, killing time. Combat was very close. You could hear it, like a hill or two away. You could hear rattling of weapons. He told me one day there was, German prisoners of war coming back on the road, trotting with arms up, 4x4s back of the machine guns trained. If anybody had made for the brush, he'd have been quickly shot. There were casualties. He says we were green troops at that time. We had not seen anything. But after a little while, they started to work every night to bring in Patton's Third Army. And once the breakout happened, which eventually happened like late July, then Patton would move. Then he would show his skills as a mechanized warfare man.
So how, going back to like World War I and World War II, how did those events kind of happen? That just seems to me like such a pertinent question. Like, can we just talk about that a little bit? Is your knowledge of that? Like, what is the origin of World War I and then World War II?
World War I, the established old order, which had existed for many hundreds of years in Europe, had not really changed. And, of course, these alliances existed.
Well, like the French Revolution and Napoleon, for instance, that was a pretty big change. How does that play into the origins of it?
To try to talk about that, how it relates to World War I, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's crazy because they're so close together in time.
Yeah.
The French Revolution was like probably 30 years before World War I.
My real knowledge is like 20th century and sometimes a bit earlier, Civil War, but World War I is the old order. It's regarded as the death of the old order, because it's the Europe of hundreds of years that things had been like this, but there were secret alliances. There was these, alliances. There were secret. There was these like rabid nationalism, and then this chain reaction happened, Historians are starting to think now, though, some of them, maybe it wasn't inevitable, but it was always in the minds of people that it was inevitable that war would be fought. Now some of them are thinking no. But when Franz Ferdinand, Archduke of Austria-Hungary, was assassinated by a member of the Black Hand in what is Sarajevo. Bosnians have told me pronounce it like this, Sarajevo. And so I will pronounce it like that, hoping I'm correct. But a gentleman who was...
Sarajevo.
That's how it's spelled.
Yeah.
A gentleman who told me that he was a sniper in the war there, who I met here in town and got wounded, talked to me about these things, and he said, pronounce it Sarajevo. So that's what I'm doing. So anyway, when the Archduke was shot by a member of the Black Hand, executed, and his wife, I forget the term, Duchess. Of course, Serbia went to war with Austria-Hungary, and then, because the world didn't really know, the Russians had an arrangement with Serbia. Not an alliance. They didn't have to come in, but they felt it was necessary because these are our Slavic brothers. And then Austria-Hungary, who had neglected its military a long time, was very worried because the Russians were sending a massive army against them. And so they called upon Germany because they had an arrangement with Germany. Well, they had more than an arrangement. They had an alliance. Germany, of course, came in. But
so were the sides the same? Russia was with the Allies. They were with Britain and France against
ultimately,
Germany?
Well,
and they won.
France and Russia had alliances. The French were supposed to come in as an ally of Russia, but Germany came in as its ally of Austria-Hungary, and then the Russians called upon France, and France had to come in because it's their ally, and the British came in with the French. And so you've got this system that's like, you can't, once it starts, it's like a clock. You've set the thing. It's going to happen. I mean, these alliance troops are mobilizing. You can't really, at a certain point, stop. The Kaiser wanted to stop it at a certain point. He couldn't do it. There's no way to, but the Germans have more culpability than others in this thing. This I learned a couple of years ago because my friend is deeply into World War I.
Yeah.
And they saw opportunity, they didn't need to do it, crush France, and then with Austria-Hungary we turn on the Russians. That was not necessary. And if things had gone differently, they would have won in France too. But they were worried about the situation when Russian troops crossed the East Prussian frontier. And if you look at old maps from prior to 1940, East Prussia, north of Poland, was part of Germany. It had been part of Germany a very long time. Well, Russian forces came in, they won a battle, and the Germans were worried enough that they took a corps or two away from the forces that were attacking France, were swinging down on France in the Schlieffen Plan, which several armies would move down kind of like a door closing on France with the elbow at Luxembourg, through Belgium, and they took away enough troops that it cost them, and so that they could have had a victory, and they failed. The Schlieffen Plan was much thought out, and the armies got a little too independent. If they had just stuck to the plan, they were probably going to win, and the French saved themselves with British help.
So basically, you got a patchwork of alliances, and especially two big major ones.
Yes.
You've got many alliances, but really it seems to fall into two major categories.
Yes.
Big players.
Yes.
Essentially. And then Franz Ferdinand gets assassinated, and one country moves against another, and then that triggers the set of alliances. So now you have a world war, basically.
Yes.
And then obviously I would still like to go back and learn more about that, but I got to do my own reading in terms of what the prerequisites for that war were. But that's what happened in broad terms, right? So then Germany loses, and then they feel this sense of tremendous, they are forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles.
Yes.
Which what was the effect of that, basically?
The Treaty of Versailles was harsh enough.
It was like in a rail car or something like that.
It was in the rail car in the Compiègne forest, and it was harsh enough. The French were particularly offended, but a generation had died. And when a generation dies, it's like Germany was... There were those that were really angered by it. The reparations were massive, and Hitler played on that. It's definitely the seeds of the seeds of World War II. Mm-hmm. Hitler played upon it. He was really good at whipping up. He was a master at whipping up crowds. And he would talk about Versailles. He would talk about the November criminals, which were those that the Germans that signed this alliance. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to bring pride again, and he did, but at the cost of this new war. And
so he builds up the German military, breaks the treaty.
Yes.
And there's like clear signs that things are not going in a good direction, but the other powers are pretty hesitant to actually fight a head-on war with Hitler. Is that the case?
He could have been stopped, but I mean, they didn't want another war. The arrangement was that...
Could have been stopped how, though? Just from, like, blitzkrieging him?
He could have been... Well, the French were supposed to deal with it, and they didn't want another war.
Right.
So when he moved into the Saar in 1935...
They didn't even defend Paris. He just walked into Paris and took it.
Well, I'm speaking several years before that. I mean, for instance, he walked into the Saar in 1935, and... nobody moved. The French didn't move. Mm-hmm. He wasn't supposed to have more than a small self-defense force. Germany, in the wake of World War I, was allowed to have, I believe, 100,000 troops, of which 4,000 or 5,000 could be officers. It could have no tanks. It could have no submarines. It could have no air force. A very minimal force. And Hitler
but there's nothing to enforce any of that, was there? Because he had the Luftwaffe, he had all the Panzer.
Yeah, they
tanks
weren't like enforcing. So by degrees, Hitler was beginning to build up. They trained in Russia. The Russians had an arrangement with them so they could train there, and by degrees they were training and building forces. And of course, the Spanish Civil War occurred I want to say 1936, maybe a little bit before, and Germany and Italy, being fascists, they came in with Francisco Franco, who was attempting to overthrow the government, which was largely communist. He too was a fascist, to defeat the Spanish government, and Hitler used it as a training ground. The Italians didn't really learn too much, even though they contributed a lot. Germany learned a lot. They sent the Condor Legion. They were training troops for war. And those guys came back, and air operations, ground operations. There was some mechanized war. And so he came back with, and then, of course, 1936, the Rhineland, which was a much bigger prize. The Rhineland in between France and Germany, because that was always a contested, like, German-French region in there, and the French were supposed to deal with this because Germany was weak at that point, quite weak. Hitler was worried about it, but the French never moved. So he got the Rhineland. His bluff was not called, and continued to build up, and then, of course, the Austria-Hungary, Austria, I should say, broken up or occupied 1938, the Anschluss, and again, there's concern, but Britain had let its military lapse. They weren't in a position to fight back. French were regarded to be the strongest nation in Europe, but they weren't willing to fight. Then Munich, 1938, like we were talking about in the cafe just now, had to talk to Hitler. Neville Chamberlain of Britain, French leader. How far is this thing going to go? He wants the Sudetenland. He wants, the extreme border.
And didn't Neville Chamberlain famously sign an agreement with Hitler, and he waved it around like he had just stopped the war?
That's the Munich agreement, and Hitler agreed.
Which ended up not, not aging well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hitler agreed that the Sudetenland will be the end of it. The Czechs didn't want to give it up. Czechoslovakia didn't want to give it up. Not only was its defensive belt. When you look at that region against Germany, without it, they can't defend themselves. And 80 to 90% of their natural resources came out of there. It's a small, solid military of about 8 divisions. Czechoslovakia would have made a solid fight of it against Germany, but once they were effectively, that was taken away. They weren't going to be able to fight back, but Hitler agreed. This is where it ends. I will not go any further. Poland was guaranteed at that time. The French and the British are going to back you up. You attack Poland, this is war. You can't go any farther. And okay. And then, as you say, Neville Chamberlain came back. We have peace in our time. That was what he said. And Hitler immediately started to chew away pieces of Czechoslovakia until by around March of 1939 he had the whole country. And nobody did anything. And then his last of his bloodless conquests, these are the bloodless conquests.
Not Poland, because there was blood involved in Poland.
That's a little later. The last of the bloodless contest was around April or slightly later, 1939. The port of Memel, along up near Lithuania, and there's a little land area occupied. And that's the last. And so they're festering through the summer. Europe is getting ready to go to war. And nobody's done anything about this. Germany's like becoming this monster. And nobody's done anything. And and then the pressure's on Poland. The pressure's on Poland, and he wants, that's kind of a specialty of mine. When I read about the Poles and the fight they made autumn of 1939, I said, who are these people? These courageous people up against this behemoth, and they don't back down. They fight with honor. They fight with courage. They fight. They've kept their culture, and they're alive centuries against these rapacious neighbors on every side. Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary, and they've saved themselves. And every once in a while, through the mists, Poland emerges again as a state, then goes under again. The first, second, third partitions of Poland. World War II is regarded to be the fourth partition of Poland. Well, they were supposed to, if you look at the map, they have of Poland of those days, they have a little corridor to the Baltic Sea, which is the extreme, northwest. Germany wanted to have a corridor, take that, and be able to have a road system up through and into East Prussia. Polish didn't want to give it up. They didn't feel they had to. They didn't feel. Poland always took in the words of the great Colonel Beck, who was their Minister of Defense the period before and into World War II. We took a middle path. Don't ally yourself closely with Germany or Russia. Poland's will be a middle path. Well, Hitler was planning to attack the last day of August of 1939. It happened on the 1st of September. And immediately Britain and France are like, you need to pull out or we're going to war. And he wouldn't. Again, the bluff this time was called. But there wasn't really a lot they could do for Poland materially. You could go to war. France was supposed to attack, and they didn't do it in the West because he had a very thin barrier. Most of his troops were in the East. Poland fought for 36 days. They had no organized troops left in the field at that point, but they never surrendered. The Russians came in on the 17th of September, eastern Poland, and so Poland was consumed, and now we're into World War II.
Right. I want to jump back into that narrative in one sec, but I have a nice side story. So in terms of my family's involvement, say fighting the Germans or whatever, my mom is Sicilian. That's why I have the Sicilian flag on my shirt. But my dad is English and Scottish. You're good. And his family were involved in the colonization of Africa, which is not something I'm necessarily have ever endorsed wholesale. I understand all the different dark aspects involved in the controversies or what have you, but it's not something that I necessarily just outright put down either. I think there's different aspects to history. There's good sides and bad sides to every story and multiple angles to every story as well. But certainly colonization, colonialism, exploitation of resources, culminating in like quote unquote white minority rule. Of course, then the tides of change came in the 1960s. Britain endorsed decolonization of Africa. Rhodesia became a pariah state, essentially. Through 1965 to 1980, when they lost the war in 1980, Robert Mugabe became the leader. I actually had a family member who was the Secretary of Agriculture under Robert Mugabe. He stayed in what was now called Zimbabwe. His name was Dennis Norman. He wrote a book. He had met with different foreign dignitaries such as Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. Anyways, I'm going off on a side tangent, but we, the British, were always fighting the Germans, even in Africa. So, like, when my great-great-grandfather, he was in the Pioneer column, that was in 1890, that was when 200 Englishmen established the state of Rhodesia, which is an insane story. It's almost similar to the Spanish conquest of the Inca, because there was only 200 of them initially. This is a country that was already consisting of over 1 million native Africans. So, I mean, these African people could have squashed these British pioneersmen, you might call them, colonizers, easily. Even though we had wagons full of guns, there's a lot of his story talking about them trying to drag these big wagons of guns through mud and stuff like that, like in the African frontier. But these guys were way out of their element, It doesn't matter how many guns you've got when you're surrounded by millions of people. So I do wonder if people looked back and thought man, we should have just crushed these guys when they were smaller in number,
Yeah.
Because it would have been a much tougher sell. Maybe they would have wanted revenge or whatever. But it would have been a much tougher sell to colonize Africa if they were fighting back violently. I mean, they pretty much just walked in there and set down the Union Jack and said, this is our operation now. So, anyways, I bring up that story because they were accompanied by a guy named Frederick Selous, who is very famous for having been friends with Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt once said Frederick Selous was the greatest big game hunter in the world. So I have a hand-signed copy of his book. It's called A Hunter's Wanderings in Africa. And he inscribed it to my great-great-grandfather. He said, to Thomas Wilburn Rutland, who went to Mashonaland under the guidance of the author of this book, signed Frederick Selous. So I always thought that was a really cool story, but he ended up being shot during World War I by a German sniper. Selous was. So that was how he met his end. I mean, maybe it was his karma to get shot and killed, I always thought, because he killed so many elephants, probably a few people too.
Yeah.
He loved shooting things. He ended up getting shot.
Yeah.
But the other story is that my great-grandfather, so the one I just mentioned, he was in the Pioneer column. That was my great-great-grandfather. But my great-grandfather, this is now my grandpa's dad. So my grandpa's mom's dad, that was on his mother's side, was Thomas Rutland.
Okay.
That was his mother's father, who was in the Pioneer column. But my grandpa's dad had came to Africa and met his mom in Kenya. So he was in the British military, and they was in the King's African Rifles. He'd served during World War I and World War II in Africa under the British military. And then after that, he met my great-grandma, Thomas Wilburn's daughter, Catherine Rutland. They met in Kenya, and they moved to Rhodesia because the family had already been associated with Rhodesia.
Yeah.
So they went from Kenya, the coffee farm, into Rhodesia. They had a dairy farm there. Anyways, the father of my grandfather, he's the one who has my last name, Pilcher. His name was James Thomas Pilcher. He served in World War I when he was 15 for the British. Wow. He was on a ship that people can Google. It's called the HMS Cressy. And it was sunk early on in World War I by a German U-boat. So hundreds of people died that day on the HMS Cressy, but he was somebody who had swam to safety. He was in the water for a number of hours. So these stories, they seem so far away nowadays, but we all have, a lot of people are unaware, immediate family members who either died in those conflicts or almost died.
Yes.
So if my great-grandfather had not survived that day on the HMS Cressy, I would not exist because he had yet to have kids at that point.
Yes.
So he never would have had a son named Roy Pilcher, who never would have had a son named Paul Pilcher, who never would have had a son named Dylan Pilcher, and I would not be here.
Yeah. You told me some of this before, but you didn't tell me all of that. It's fascinating. And it makes me think, that part of Africa was the epicenter of stuff for quite a while. I mean, you've got, the Boer War. Earlier than that, it's the Zulu, like the clash with the British and the Zulu peoples.
Yeah.
And then World War One, the Germans. Now, I'm a little hazy on some details, but it's probably part of what is now Tanzania.
Yeah.
Germans. And they had a naval vessel up on the river.
I think they called it Tanganika.
Yeah, Tanganika, thank you.
Yeah.
And they had a naval vessel up.
And they were also in Namibia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they had this naval vessel up in the deep in the river system, and the British were never able to take them out. The thing was battling, shelling, moving, and it was this riverine, what they call riverine warfare. The war ended 1918. They were still there.
Mm.
It's like a clash of peoples and cultures, I would say. And the great book.
And to this day, I'm the only one, besides my other family members, I've never met anybody in my life except for family who have that story, who either resided in Rhodesia or etc. Especially to the level that my family was actually involved in the establishment of Rhodesia.
Yes.
Never met anyone who was from there. None of that. Just family.
Yeah.
It's so weird. I'm still waiting to one day just have someone be like, oh yeah, my dad's from Rhodesia or my grandpa or whatever. And as you know, it's going to become less and less likely over time. You're going to have to track these people down through certain societies or organizations because we're not we're reproducing, but the state of Rhodesia is no more.
Yeah, it's gone.
It's now, it's like the lost cause of the South almost.
Zimbabwe, right?
Yeah. So, it's still a place, obviously, but it's not Rhodesia anymore. It's not run by the Rhodesians and et cetera. So it's one of those things where it is kind of like talking to your grandpa who was a Civil War veteran or something.
Yeah.
He's like, man, we just did things totally differently, and we fought till the end, but it's just a story now. So I don't think my family is particularly bitter about it at all. They were always pretty liberal Rhodesians, not outwardly racist or anything like that. But they did. My grandpa is a great guy. Made a big impact in the community here as a bird watcher and stuff like that.
Yes.
He just no college training for that. He went to university for engineering, but he just did the citizen scientist thing. He grew up in the wildlife and the nature in Africa is just intense. So he grew up on a farm. You got all sorts of exotic bird species, weird stuff we've never seen over here, right? But we've got giraffes, they got zebras, they got lions. So the nature experience for him, he was just always enamored by that. And then he moved to Vermont in 1965 and transitioned it to that.
Yeah.
Can't remember where I was going with all that, but just that Rhodesia is no longer a country. So that was just a little bit more about the German British kind of interplay. Of course, I find all that fascinating too because the British are Germanic kind of,
Yes.
You've got the Celtic influence and whatever, and Normans. The Normans are pretty close to the Germanic too, but the Anglos and the Saxons and the Jutes, they were literally from Germany.
Yes.
So I think Hitler was very well aware of that. I've heard that he always kind of wanted to have some sort of truce happen between Great Britain and Germany because of the fact that they were related.
He had a soft spot for the English. He didn't really want to crush them.
Right.
He didn't want to do it. They were definitely in the Aryan idea of the importance of the races. They were definitely inferiors, but that's how he felt of the UK. What we now. But
But, you know, some people today, they've really tried to debunk the whole Aryan theory, that it's completely pseudoscience and whatever. Do you have any opinions on that?
What I've read
Is there
indicates
such thing
that
as an Aryan? Is it a misuse of the term? Like, how does
it definitely is that. It's really a bogus, like, you know, what is an Aryan? I mean, it's just this manufactured idea of this, like, you know, what some
for instance, my mom's from Sicily. She's
Yeah.
got like thick black hair, brown eyes, and like olive skin.
Yeah.
But let's just say she happened to be one of the blonde, blue-eyed Sicilians. Would
Yeah.
that make her Aryan, or no?
You see, it's a loose, like, you know, it's a manufactured tenet of National Socialism, and it's
Yeah.
really, you know,
So they didn't really have a lot of science behind it. They just kind of
No.
identified themselves as Aryans.
the
and-
so-called blonde-haired beast.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, the North German, you know, the Scandinavian, you know, the Dutchman. You know, these are like, you know, the great peoples in their eyes, but it's like, not really. You know, it's it's part of their own twisted idea of racial superiority, the Herrenvolk. But it's like, you know, for instance, if you wanted to be an SS man, you know, at the Schutzstaffel, the protection staff.
Yeah.
Most people know what they are. They had a Allgemeine SS, which is the general SS, which is the camp guys, the camp guards, and all that kind of stuff.
And like
Administrative
Himmler, he was
SS.
the captain of the SS, right?
What's that?
Himmler.
Yeah, under Heinrich Himmler. And then there's the Waffen SS, which means the armed SS, and they formed units for combat. Of early on, the really deemed to be elite. The peoples I just mentioned, Germans, you know, like they had Norwegians, Danes, that's all the Dutchmen. And then they had people from other countries. The SS took all kinds of people. And as the war went on and as Germany began to lose, they were taking people they never would have taken. But it's a misnomer. I mean, the racial superiority stuff, that's like, they took 2 divisions of Russians. They took 2 divisions of Italians. They took some Swiss and Swedes, even though they weren't in the war.
Yeah.
They even took 3 Americans, and I'd love to know their stories, because they were definitely traitors to join the Waffen SS. But they, you know. Oh, but I was going to say that in the early days, when their admission standards were really high, enlisted men had to prove their ancestry back to 1800 and officers to 1750. Before, you know, I would imagine defeat was teaching the need. We need more men. They took like units from the former Yugoslavia. They took Muslims. You know, the SS men, I mean, all kinds. It was a strange animal.
Yeah.
Men that wore
They had
fezzes.
Muslims in there.
Men that wore fezzes.
I've
and
heard that before.
Fought for Germany, you know.
If my phone's died yet. No, it's still going. We're 38 minutes strong. We can go another like 10 or 15, I'm thinking.
So yeah,
Nice
it was
little
a
45-minute episode.
Hitler himself was not, you know, he's an Aryan under the looser part of the term, but he's an Austrian, and that's not the highest order of. But the British, they thought that, you know, the British would understand, meaning you can't win and you're going to come over to us. So they never took it seriously, like we're really going to have to invade. So they didn't build the invasion like craft that they needed. They didn't they just thought they'd understand. Well, they were very stubborn people, as you well know, and Winston Churchill would never submit. And when, you know, they lost the Battle of Britain through bad planning, really, because the RAF was going out. It was fighting magnificently, but the Luftwaffe was a much bigger instrument. But they didn't really tactically plan properly. And it doesn't mean that the British were going to lose, even if the RAF went out, because the Royal Navy, I'm glad we didn't have to find out, but the Royal Navy was going to come down and they were going to sacrifice themselves. And it would have been a slaughter for Germany.
So when you talk about the RAF and everything, I think about the concept of